wrote an article about an event that happened in around 1829. And this was an event that was published in South German newspapers, giving major publicity to what had occurred. And this is what happened. It was an evening of the 9th of Av. The rabbi of a small town in South Germany had his synagogue brilliantly lit up, and he invited members of his congregation to attend in their best clothes. This was the night. This was the day, our day, today, this day. When over the whole face of the earth, wherever small groups of Jews form a congregation and come together to pray, light and cheerfulness and festive mood are banished from the gathering. And every man who calls himself a Jew sits mourning on the ground. And lamentations over the orphan city of Hashem find an echo in every Jewish heart. And it was on this evening that this particular preacher mounted the pulpit and raised a loud protest against the sadness and the mourning and this yearning for the land of Israel. He accused the millions of his mourning brethren in the whole world around him of treason against the state, and in that context, the fatherland. And he called upon his congregation, in contrast to these millions, to show by means of a celebration their rebuttal of this out-of-date yearning, and to give proof of this patriotic attachment to the fatherland in which they then lived. They would make it a day of celebration. Jerusalem, he said, was here on German soil. Now, in hindsight, we look back through the eyes of history, and it's laughable. It's laughable on so many different levels that this individual should feel what he felt. But the truth is that in many respects, it's not easy to actually understand what Tisha B'Av is, to understand what Golus is, to understand what redemption is. Is it about the destruction of the Beit Rishon, Beit Sheni? Is it about the geographic displacement? Is it a focus on the terrorism at the hand of anti-Semites, suffering, Holocaust? Is it so far-fetched that when a Jew feels a certain sense of arrival, then they start feeling, is it really necessary any longer? In the past, we have done an activity. We've spoken about an activity that I'd like to try again this morning. And the truth is, there are no real novelties in relation to this. The activity itself actually has great relevance in relation to our guest, Rabbi Blachman, because he exposed me to this a couple of years ago. But the activity on face value, and certainly to a young 18-year-old boy, is interesting. But as years progress, it becomes somewhat more challenging, especially if one is willing to indulge in the process. So for a moment, if you would close your eyes and indulge me, and imagine yourself standing in front of a mirror. And you're asking yourself a question, but you're not with anyone else. You're by yourself in this room. And you're asking yourself, who am I? Now, if the forum was somewhat different, we could perhaps go around the room and ask for a couple of answers to this question. In our context, especially among more observant individuals who have learned somewhat, the answer evolves relatively quickly. But in truth, I asked the question this morning not for the right answer, not yet, but actually for the wrong answer. And there are actually a variety of answers that are given that can fall into that category. In truth, for our purposes, there isn't a wrong answer, at least not now. So if you did it, the chances are that immediately when you ask yourself this question, an answer popped into your head. The chances are almost immediately you put that answer aside and a couple of other options came into your mind. And then as you thought, it evolved and perhaps even changed. For our purposes, if we can hold on to the very first answer that popped into one's head, this is of most significance. And then perhaps secondary would be those that we quickly change them to. And then perhaps we could get into what the right answer is at a later stage. Why would it be so important to acknowledge the first answer that pops into one's mind? What is it about that answer? Not to be judgmental, but the chances are whatever answer it is that popped into one's mind right at the very beginning, if you really analyze it, if you really dramatize it, and you ask yourself whether you would like to be known for that answer, chances are we wouldn't really like to be known for that particular answer. You know, to put it a different way, is it really enough? Does it really do justice to define your very being by that answer that you gave? Did any of the answers really suffice? If you think about one's life, are those answers good enough to describe your very existence? And yet for a moment in time, we give those answers. So what is it about those answers? Those answers on some level are important enough that we're willing to actually define ourselves by them. And it's an unbelievable thought if one thinks about it. Person defines themselves by their profession. Person defines themselves by what they look like. Person defines themselves by their hobbies. Person defines themselves by their relationships, by their experiences, whatever they may be. But in that moment, it was good enough to define yourself by it. Now, does anyone here really believe that that is their definition of self? That is who they are? We know that that's not who we are, but at least we should. And yet somehow it's so hard for the real me to stand up. Mentioned last night, the Torah teaches us, make for me a sanctuary, and I'll dwell within them. Within them is in the minds and the hearts of each and every single one of us. It's there. It's only that we can't really see it or experience it. And even if we can, it's only in brief moments in time. Practically speaking, there seems to be this covering that doesn't allow that inner self to come forward. And we get caught up again and again and again and again with what we think is important. Our professions, how we look, what we have, our relationships. And by the way, all of them are important on some level, but important enough to really define who we are as people, as individuals, as a community, as a nation, questionable. But those externalities can become so important to the point that eventually one can feel that one is redeemed. And this can manifest in very different forms, and it has throughout the ages, depending on what was defined at the particular time as being what was necessary for redemption. Truth is that if I could keep it really simple for a moment, the real opportunity today, utilizing all of the events of the past, is to really trigger within ourselves a recognition of the fact that that inner spark that is found within is maybe not shining the way that it could, the way that it should. And in indulging in the mourning process, we're able to peel away a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more. At least to have a goal. At least to have a goal so that one can take one step forward. Amazing point before I hand over to Rav Blachman. Last night when Pinchas Gutta was talking, he mentioned, and he mentions it often, this notion of appreciating the spark that is found within. He saw it everywhere. We're talking about it within the context of our nation, within the context of our community, within the context of ourselves. He saw it in every human being. I'm not sure why it stuck with me so much, but one of the points he mentioned was he even saw it in an SS officer who treated him well. I mean, how good could he have treated him at the end of the day? An individual who went through, as he called it, an apocalyptic hell, could find in one of those individuals who represented that hell, he could identify a spark within. And then he said it. He said it. It's only that we have a Yetzer Hara and we have a Yetzer Tov, and somehow keep losing the battle and we keep getting distracted from what is actually important. And it builds layer after layer after layer till we can't really see it. Let's indulge in that inner spark a little bit more. Put aside all of the distractions and recognize and realize that it can actually shine forth. And we can all stand up to be the people that we are meant to be the people that we can be. And in doing so, this process is not only not a process of depression, but it actually becomes a process of joy. Blachman. Just give, will you bring the chair there?
The chair.
I'm going to begin on page 152. It's Kinnot B'Av, relating to the first temple.
Given an introduction to this Kinnot. As mentioned yesterday, that goes through different stages. It's quoted in Maimonides and Rambam and the Halachos of Avelis. You originally are in shock. It's called pachad. A sense of pachad. You're frightened. You're frozen. It's a sense of terror. A sense that doesn't make sense. Totally lost. After a while, you settle, and then suddenly you start being worried. Well, how do I go further with this? Pachad. Daiga. Daiga means being concerned. And then finally, pishpush b'maisim. Ultimately, you do some introverted introspection. And the goal is l'achzor b'tshuva. Fix something. Well, if you look in the Kinnos, our job is to see in them these different stages. And hopefully through that, figure out what we can do better. Our job is to somehow experience that feeling that they had of pachad. I don't think we'll be able to experience that ourselves. That's why Chazal tell us that our avelus privately does not demand that pachad. As I mentioned last night, we start from the daiga, from concern. But we have to try to understand how they felt. I want to read some of the Kinnot. And I want to just translate it and explain, just to show what you're about to read. Okay? So if you just open it up, and I'm going to translate a few sentences and give background to it. We're on page 152. These scriptures, I'll read it in English. Everything came to a standstill. Literally what it means. It means everything stopped. Things that we expected, the world stopped. Something overturned everything. Everything came to a standstill, literally. The planets came to a standstill. My life came to a standstill. With the destruction of Judea, the country, and the Mikdash, everything was overturned. Why? Let's understand what we're looking at here. You know, there's a midrash bought in the name of Sadia Gaon that the 3 weeks, we're culminating the 3 weeks, they're 22 days. This is day 22. They're parallel to the 22 letters of the alphabet, of the Aleph base. Know what that means. Metaphorically, the world, the universe, creation was created through the Aleph base, through the word of God, Yehi Or, Yehi Rakia, etc., etc., etc. The building blocks of existence are the Aleph base. 22 days of mourning, culminating with today, is saying the whole world fell apart. That world which was created with those 22 letters is just not there anymore. The letters have been dispersed. We've got to put them back together again. It's like a big puzzle was shattered, and now find the way to put them back together again. That's what happened to these people. Their life came to shambles. Let me explain what they expected, what they felt. They lived a life of which somehow they may have run around to pagan deities, etc., but they always knew there's a God running the show, and there's no way he will destroy his temple, and there's no way he will destroy his nation. They saw through history. Yeah, we sinned. We did the golden calf. We sinned, but we continued. We did a lot of things in the desert. If you read your Chumash, he continued. During the days of the judges, the pasuk literally says, "Bayamim ahem," in those days, "Ein melech b'Yisrael," there's no king in Israel. Ish hayashar beinav yaseh. Everybody does what he wants to do, and he didn't leave us. You know what it is? We took God for granted. We took God for granted. We take a lot of things for granted. We take the fact that we're Jewish for granted. Do you know why Mashiach will come specifically from the children of Ruth, of King David? Because she didn't take a Judaism for granted. She had to convert into it. She couldn't take, she did. Cannot be redeemed by people who take their identity for granted. We have to find, as the rabbi mentioned, what is my identity? To be honest in that search. Don't take things for granted. Sometimes I feel, young people living today in the country of Israel, I don't know. It's so they just take it all for granted. People that grew up in my days, generation that came out of the post-Holocaust children, that our parents, like we just had a nucleus family of a father and a mother and children because everybody was burnt. People that grew up in the world that we were the scapegoats of history, living under the bridge, drinking cheap wine of other nations and not having a home of our own. Believe me, every time we saw the flag of Israel, we did not take it for granted. We didn't take anything for granted. We didn't take a democracy for granted. We didn't take that we're a nation for granted. So how could we not be one? Sometimes I think it's because people are taking the great country that we have today for granted. They don't realize sometimes they're tearing it apart. People just don't realize. It's like taking a marriage for granted. God help you if you take your marriage for granted. It'll be terrible. The smallest thing can put up a fire and destroy it. Worst thing is the people take things for granted. And sometimes you have to have trauma to realize that you can't take it for granted. And that's what Avelis is all about, the shock. Goodness sakes, I can't take life for granted. I can't take life for granted. Can't take the fact that I have a father or a mother or a wife or children or anything for granted. I'm not saying, oh, be thankful to God. I'm not doing that at the moment. I'm just appreciate what you have. Just appreciate what you have. Appreciate the fact they took God for granted. And therefore, they could two-time him, do what they want. Okay, hey, we're married, right? Okay, so I'll have a little midlife crisis with a whatever it be. Can't take God for granted. Can't take the fact that we now are a nation of our own, developing our own culture, our language. Can't take it for granted. I wish people would realize that. If that would be enough to come out of this day with that, you don't take anything for granted. You would daven differently, you would talk differently, you would feel differently, you would experience life differently. The most important prayer of the day would be Modim Anachnu Lach. Thank you. It would be Thanksgiving 24/7, 365. You would say good morning to your spouse, and wow, Romeo. Think of it. And all that came to a standstill. Because when the Gemara says, this is crazy. Ein Adam Eimed al Das Rabbi, no one really understands and connects to his teacher until he dies. Ein Divrei Torah nekvayim, my teachings of my teacher do not really internalize in myself. Ad shebalehem nesafim. It's a terrible, terrible thing of human condition. We take things for granted. It's only when we don't have them anymore do we start internalizing what we had. I remember when Zechron Levracha, my beloved father, passed away in, 1988. And I had left home very early. I mean, I had actually left home at the age of 11 to go to school in New York. And by 15, I was off in Israel. We used to come home every 2.5 years in those days for 3 weeks. So somehow, I had a great relationship with my parents, but it was long distance. So somehow I got used to it. Well, that long distance became a perpetual long distance when he passed on. I went to a phase of the whole year, every Rosh Chodesh, I would have the boys in my house, and I would give a 3-hour dissertation on father-son relationships. Because I was rediscovering what my relationship was. Literally every month, in a whole year, I went through a phase of introspection. It was like, wow, now I know what I have. And my biggest availus was, why didn't I do that beforehand? Why does it have to be that? Oh, but that's the way it is. That's what human beings are. He had to die for me to know what I have. They say the distance makes the heart grow fonder. Yeah, but God, so distant. Yes, it is that way. So that's why death is like, puts everything to a standstill. And do you know what it is like to be a nation which all of a sudden is dust? You know, it's a nation which is used to be having its own monarchy, its own commonwealth, its own service, a culture of God, temple in their midst, the epicenter of their existence. And that, even when we go wayward, when you got used to this marriage, you say stupid things. You think, would you say this while you were dating? You crazy? I want to get married. No. Okay, you're married already. The ring's on the finger, but don't you have? No. Don't take it for granted. Don't take your children for granted. Don't take your children for granted. It's a big biological process until they happened. And sometimes it wasn't easy. How can you take them for granted? How can you take anything for granted? But when you do take it for granted, and then all of a sudden God says, enough. And he's going to introduce you to trauma. You're going to be expecting him to come forth and do something, right? You always do, right? We always kiss and make up. He says, no more, brother dear. This time, the courts. This time it stops. Everything stops. The whole world that you're comfortable with falls apart. And that's the first word of this Kinnot when it says, everything came to a standstill. The next word, turn away from me, those who exiled me, made me here. You're an outcast. You're nothing. They made me feel filth and refuse. I was a beautiful nation of priests and scholars, prophets. You're worthless. Your whole stature fell apart. Everything that you took for granted because everyone knew you were a godly nation, a nation of priests, a nation of values. Forget it. You overstepped. You're past it. You lost it. The balloon has been busted. And that's what we felt. We've been castigated to solitude. We have no meaning. You know, the beautiful pasuk comes next. Sakosa mishkan miskos farai. You know what that means? You held back protection of your mikdash. You covered the skies and took away our protection that we had expected to have. We took for granted the fact that God was on our side. You covered things that we expected to be open. We expect the heavens to come down and save us. No. That's called trauma. That's a terrible pachad. We can go on and on to the extent that it continues to say, I would just skip a few sentences. It says over here in the second paragraph, Nafla odenu b'tchut Jerusalem, our gem, has fallen into the depths of waters. It sunk. This was my jewel. This was us. Meaningless. My eye longs for the visions of Ben Brachia. Oh, I expected all the salvations of the prophet Zechariah to come into being. It didn't happen. Yet this is going to be Jerusalem and populated by children, by elderly folk, and everyone's dead. But I expected it to happen. Why did we expect it to happen? Weren't you sinning? Weren't you first temple, avodah zarah? Weren't you engaged in other gods? Gila arayis, you engaged in illicit sexual behavior, incest. Shvichas damim, people were killing each other, and yet somehow, but I'm a Jew. It reminds me of some gangsters in the 1920s. You know, they were Jewish. I won't kill you at Shabbos. We'll wait till after Havdalah. That's what it feels like. But take it to yourself. What don't you take for granted in your relationship with God? Don't we all expect things to go well? Im Yitzah Hashem, Yeh Tov. Mi amar lecha sheyeh tov. Who said it's going to be good? Maybe it won't be good. Maybe it's only good if you decide to look to him and say, God, I hope it will be good. Maybe you have to do something to tell him that you're not taking it for granted. Maybe you actually have to daven once, like a child talks to his father. Maybe, you know, we go through so many things in life. Someone's sick. And we say, oh, this is a refuah of somebody or something like that, right? Or we pray. Are you really begging? Are you taking it for granted that you will say X amount of words and phew, abracadabra, the rabbit will come out of the hat? Are you really begging? Or are you taking it for granted? Hey, you're asking for health every day, aren't you? Rafa'enu Hashem v'nei Rafa'e. Have you begged for it? No, I figure I press the right buttons and then the movie will come up. You know, that's how it works. Or I don't believe in anything. I'm just saying it kind of tradition. That's something else. There's another option there. But if you believe that you are talking to an entity which really counts, and it's up to him to decide, have you ever begged? Have you metaphorically gone on your knees? Metaphorically. It says, please. Have you ever introduced the word please in your translation? I don't want any of these art scrolls don't have the word please in the translation. I think they should put it in capital letters on top of the page. Please. How can you take it for granted? You know how much you took it for granted? You know what that means? The poet says, we expected miracles that happened in Gilgal. You know what happened in Gilgal? We expected miracles, so to speak, of the sun to stop setting. We took for granted, God has come out and do another Kriyas Yamsu for us. He's going to stop Shemesh B'Shiva Yerech by Emek Ayalon. That's what we expected. Because we took it for granted. And I say today because it's so important to learn not to take anything for granted. And I hope and pray that maybe one day we'll be able to figure this out without trauma, without shock. But this is the first issue called pachad. This whole Kinnot, if you look at it carefully, there's no discussion here of why. There's no discussion here of remorse. Read it carefully. It's a list of shock. Wow, this is terrible. This is terrible. And you didn't show up. It almost sounds like a list of complaints. If you read it carefully with the translation, forget the Hebrew. There is no meaning in saying these things in a language that you don't understand. You are reading poetry. Can you imagine reading Latin poetry if you don't speak Latin? There's no meaning in saying this in a language you don't understand. This is not Shmoneh Esrei, which there's actually meaning in saying the words in the language of the tefillah. This is definitely not the scriptures where you actually have even a mitzvah of every word you say if you don't understand. This is medieval poetry, friends. And if you don't understand it, read it in language in English. And read the commentary to tell you, because the purpose of reading poetry is to arouse you to a sensation and a feeling. Can you go in a time machine back to that period? It's like these TV programs, which all of a sudden you end up, I don't know where, in 1442. I don't know. They have these things. They always have these things. The famous genre. Okay? That's what you're supposed to be doing here. So honestly, I mamish think you should say it in English, unless you're very well read in Hebrew, and you know the midrashic sources of the poem and the inferences of the poem. Because if you don't know the inferences of the poem, what do you say? Well, it's very nice. You're doing things that all the Jews do around the world, which is very sweet and very important, and I'll hug you for it. But why don't you want to do the way it was meant to be? You're supposed to take this as a transporter into a period and try to understand what the poet is trying to tell you. It's poetry, it's not prose. You have to figure out not what the words are, but what they mean to him and what they're supposed to arouse in you. So I really, really think we should read this carefully and see what this is saying. We complain. Why is it that they killed King Yoshiyahu? Why is it? Does anybody know the generation of King Yoshiyahu? Do they know there was totally pagan idol worship and they used to ridicule him because he tried to eradicate paganism and they backhandedly continued with it? And yet we ask. Because we're your children. Then we say, Avinu, Malkeinu, do this. Sometimes I feel, one of the most painful things I notice. Did you ever read you ever understand when you say Avinu Malkeinu? Say, God, my Father, my King. Well, I usually whisper the King because I'm not too. Father, I like, okay? Holy Father. King means I'm your servant. It means I have obligations. And then you ask this whole list of requests, right? Do this for me, do this for me, do this for me. Parnasa, Chalkala, Chaim. I want a good life. I want, somewhere in the Bay, in Cape Town for a nice summer house, I want a good life, okay? But then you come, and it's like going to Saks Fifth Avenue and filling it, which is a decent store. And then you're filling it up with all the beautiful frocks that you want to own. And then you're going to the cashier and you pile up this big pile. Well, that's a few $1,000s over there. And you go to the cashier and say, can you give me credit? Because I really don't have any credit rating. I have no cash. A little charity from Saks won't hurt you. And save me. Don't you feel stupid when you say that? You're asking a whole list of requests. You basically say, I don't even have a credit rating. Definitely don't have cash. Plastic's meaningless. Chesed. I hide myself in shame. And the funny thing is, people sing that. Isn't that true at the end? How can you sing that and sing you jerk? You should say that in the most profoundest sense of shame possible. Isn't it ironic that we sing that? You walked in, because we're taking him for granted. This is the same thing that when I look at this Kinnot and I see my Avinu Malkeinu. And then I learn how to say it differently. And when everyone's singing, I cover my head with my talis and I do it my way. And I think everybody should be covering their head with their talis and doing it their way. Because I'm embarrassed. Because I understand that you can't take this for granted. So this is the most important part of this Kinnot. God should help us that we shouldn't need shock, trauma, to stop taking things for granted. But this is what this Kinnot is. So let's say read it. Okay. You want to read loudly or something like that? Okay. Kavasur menem shimonu avrai schema ism shimon idei chavirai sakaisim mishkan triskaisim avrai sakaisim of the gugi avrai safu kafamadu abirai nisilaka labirai nafloi deina bitsul tuchia enichi so chazon ben brachia apilegu gal chavuya eni moileles pivani is nechuya osavini cham veikra libchia. V'namal eila ani b'yichia, apnei prasnuf zu chasideha, palgei suf socha, kalu yiseideha, pochad chet shilei, תקף סוידהו, פוצו חזריה, יחס שידהו, פוצו מעשיה לנידהו, פרסות ציון בידהו. ציון צדו שוני מדוני, צוף הרוי שציון זדויני, צופנו בני ולמד ודויני, צד נצאת רוי מדוני. צוק, עמי במי בידי, אוי צדיק הוא אדוני, אתה קלים, אתה הרבתו מדי אמוני, קרבת בו אליי ויחימוני, קרסי יש וגיוון אדם זמוני, קומי אבוי ריבסל אמוני, קרסי למעווי, הימר אמוני. למה רוח הפן לטפח שמורו, ראיסו כי יחסן את אירם כמורו, ראיסו כי אמר וחת לי ויח כמורו, רבת בידי חסולים כמורו. ראי ונחי מגוי אמרו, ראי עדי לא קיצה. השיבנו סיסי שימה לגוינטרני, שבתם רמייס חצי להתחייני, סיפסם משרת ודם מולדיבני, שמעת אז מרייס אביכין לתעתעני, שח ובנודו חצץ לביעני, שמו קינה נחני, איתמך כתוב בקיסר פניך, תשוב להם גמור כז חזויס פניך, תודף לצלמן יוצא על צפניך, תיתן לבב נצא פניניך. תיקל לשחרם, חייס כמוס בפניך, תווי קורסם לפניך, תווי יוצא אשר קילה למבוי חמאס בחמאס ניהלנו, עד לך וחבר הגלנו, זכינו בחור שלא קבלנו, רם הבטנו עמך כולנו, שכר אדוני מהיולנו.
Zion 16. There's a medrash that relates to Avraham Avinu on the way to the Akedah. The Satan turns to Avraham Avinu and asks him where he's going. And he says he's going to pray. And he says, you're going to pray, but you're holding a knife and a bundle of wood and fire. He says, we might stay over. Eventually, the Satan turns to Avraham Avinu and says to him, listen, I was there when Hashem told you to take your son. Why are you playing games? I know why you're here. You know why you're here. I'm asking where you're going. Just tell me where you're going. And it's a beautiful illustration of a great way to actually deal with the Satan. But it's also a beautiful illustration of the story of life. It's called excuses. When one really thinks about it, all too often we actually know or feel or on a certain level do who we are, what we should do, how we should do. We speak of taking for granted. We know that we shouldn't take it for granted. Who here doesn't know that they shouldn't take anything for granted? We need to be told not to. It's an unbelievable phenomenon. But that is the human condition in many respects. The challenge is, how does one deal with this? What does one do? Because somehow it's not enough to know what, to know how, to know that you really do want to do it. And here we are again, year after year, year after year, year after year. Food for thought, or unfood for thought. Sometimes you have to use excuses to deal with challenges. Can't actually deal with it head on. Somehow Avraham Avinu in this Medrash understood that if you were to answer the question directly, it wouldn't help. Wouldn't be able to deal with the Satan. Wouldn't be able to deal with this inclination or this challenge. Needed to use delay tactics. Put him off. I'm going to pray. I'm going to stay over for a while. Actually, an amazing observation with regards to emotion, desire, temptation, is that it actually doesn't last all too long. If one can delay, I think pretty much 9 out of 10 times it's probably the best approach. But then sometimes it doesn't work because the excuses, and they're just everywhere, excuses, to the point that one can't even remember what the goal is, where one is, where one's from, where one's going. Then it needs to be much more direct. The education or the re-education or the dealing with the problem. No one likes that. I don't like that. It is necessary when done in the right time and in the right place and contextualized correctly. Continue on page 226.
Okay, this is a Kinnot which describes the tragedy and the churban and the destruction of a second commonwealth of the Bayis Sheni. And is typified by it relates the story. Once again, you never know in these things whether we are talking of fact or we're talking about rabbinic metaphor. But whether it's fact or whether it's rabbinic metaphor, there's a message there that we must know. So the Gemara tells the story that Titus came into the Holy of Holies. He took his Sefer Torah, put it on the floor, bought a harlot, and had a sexual relationship in the Kodesh HaKadoshim. That was his way of desecrating the Holy of Holies. Then he took a sword and he sliced the pareiches. And so to speak, it started bleeding. Frightening. And he says, whoa, I must have killed their God. And that's how he walked out. So obviously, whether this happened or not is not relevant to me. What's relevant to me is what do Chazal, what do the Tanoim want to teach me by telling me this story. Because whether there really was blood coming out of the pareiches or it's a metaphor, one of the two, it's either a mashal, a metaphor of Chazal, which means they want to tell me something. And if God did this miracle, then goodness sakes, God doesn't do miracles, like just doing tricks. He wanted to teach us something. So it's either Chazal are telling us something, or God told us something through this miracle. Take it the way you want at the moment. What happened here? And this is really teaching us the tragedy of this Second Commonwealth. And actually the tragedy which touches our lives still today. The Gemara says that when Titus burnt the temple, God says in heaven, he's just grounding ground and flour. It was already meaningless beforehand. The marriage went sour. The house is empty. If you want to burn the house, the Jews burnt it before by burning the relationship. You are now grounding ground flour. That's what Chazal say. The God said, says with the Titus. You're not touching my relationship. You're only touching the externalities, the facade. What really destroyed the temple was us. But this is expressed, what Titus did this, he's expressing what is it for you to fix. So let's try to understand this. Just reading the first stanza of this poem, remember what the tormentor Titus perpetuated in the temple. He unsheathed his sword and entered the innermost chamber of the Holy of Holies. He struck terror throughout the land of our heritage, and etc. When he desecrated the showbread, he impaled the two-side curtain, and so on and so forth. He muddied our waters, inebriated our arrows with blood, and we couldn't understand it. Let's try to understand what this means. What do Chazal want to teach us? You know, what's the Kodesh and what's the Kodesh HaKadosh? The Kodesh is the Azara, the hall, in which you had the Mizbeach, the altar of the Ketoret, which you had the Shulchan, the table of the shewbread, which you had the Menorah. You had all the tools to which God sustains and nurtures the world. The Menorah would give wisdom to the world. The Shulchan with the showbread would give sustenance, physical sustenance to the world. The Ketoret would save us from sin and from plague. All great ways of expressing God's mode of behavior, how he helps us and saves us and takes care of us. That's the Kodesh. It's called the God I know, I touch, I feel. The God I talk to when I say Hashiva Shavteinu Kvar Rishona, when I say Rufa'enu V'nei Rufei, when I say Baruch Aleinu Shana Azot, Atachonen, all this is Atachonen Ladam Dat. I'm thinking literally of the God which used those tools and gave himself to us. The Gemara says that if you want to daven for wisdom, Yadrim, well, you people daven north. But if you're in Israel, okay, we daven towards the east, towards the Yerushalayim, and in Yerushalayim towards the old city. But if you want to pray for Chachma, you should daven southeast. If you want to pray for Parnasa, you daven northeast. Why? Because the menorah was in the southeast corner of the Azara. If you want to pray for Chachma, you pray for the God which gave Chachma to the world through the enlightenment of the candelabra, and therefore pray to God through the tool that he's using. You think, the God of the menorah, please give me wisdom. So you daven southeast towards the position of where the menorah was. If you need an upgrade in your portfolio, well, then you daven north, because the shulchan, physical sustenance, parnasa, was in the northeast corner. So you daven northeast. Now you figure it out here in South Africa. You guys are on the other side of the world. But that's the idea. That's what it says. So you understand in the Azariah, in the Kodesh, you had all, I would say, the practical God, the lovey-dovey God, the God I can understand, the God that, well, sometimes he lashes, but he's pretty good. I really have not that much to complain about. Nice. Thanks. And it's very nice. That's the God that we deal with of the Kodesh. That's the God that said, and things happen. Literally, Hu Amar Vayehi, Hu Tziva Vayamot. He says, let it be, and it happens. Great God. That's the God of my youth movement, I would say. That's the God that I meet at a Malav Malka on a rooftop in the old city when there's candles and a guitar and some beer, bottles of beer. Oh, yeah. Isn't he lovely? Yeah, right. It's Winnie the Pooh God. And then there's another aspect of God. And that's in the Kodesh HaKodashim. The Kodesh HaKodashim, the Gemara says, is a freaky place. Because you see, the dimension of the Kodesh HaKodashim were 20 cubits. Now, there were two big kruvim, some like angelic figures in the Kodesh HaKodashim during Solomon's temple. And each one's wingspan was 10 cubits. And the Aharon was supposed to be after one wing before the other wing. So the Gemara says that can't be. Because if the whole place is only 20 cubits, and the wingspan of each is 10, where exactly is the place of the Aharon? And the Gemara says, oh, no problem. Mass did not take space. Oh, that's nice to know. Makom Aharon eno min amidah, the covenantal relationship between you and me, the temple, the luchot, that which makes this place into a place, doesn't take place. It defies the laws of physics. Mass does not take place. We have something like that in the Second Temple, where the Gemara says that there are 10 nisim in the temple, which did not, in the first temple, did not come back in the Second Temple. One of them was, they would stand on Yom Kippur, very, very crowded. I would figure, like 30 centimeters for each, is probably enough. Yet when they bowed down, when the Kohen would say the name of God, like we bow down in Shul on Yom Kippur, all of a sudden everybody had space. Now, how did that happen? How did that happen? Well, I remember as a child, I asked my dad, so he says, you figure it out. So as well, one possibility is like the old movie, they shrunk the children. Everybody suddenly shrunk. No, I don't think, if that would have happened, they would have said that. No, they didn't shrunk the children. Well, the other possibility is the Azarah suddenly extended itself. So my father said that can't be. Why? Because the dimensions of the Azarah are very accurate according to prophecy. If they extend further without a specific halach of Kiddush, it's possible. So it's a shtachvaya not in the Azorah. There is no shtachvaya not in the Azorah. So it could have been that. It couldn't have got bigger because that wouldn't have a dim of Azorah without Kiddush. That was, I didn't think it shrunk the children. Oh, third possibility, I said. They stacked, like in an airport when the planes stack. I figured they were stacking. It was really cool. But that couldn't be because you need ishtachvaya on the ritzpah. You have to prostrate yourself on the floor. Well, if the floor didn't extend and you didn't shrink and you can't stack, so how'd they do it? Mass did not take space. Now, what is that teaching you? What's that teaching? There's another thing like that found in Midrash. When King Solomon wanted to bring the Aharon through the gates of the Mikdash, and it couldn't fit because they were exact and there's no wiggle room. So he said, Su Sharim Rashechem, rise the gates, raise your head. Yavo Melech HaKavod, that the king of honor come in, which is the Luchos and the Aharon, and all of a sudden, it fit. It fit. How could they fit? It didn't say that they bent. They fit. Mass did not take space. What does it mean, mass? You just said that, you're telling me there is a reality outside of the reality of physics. No, that's impossible. So you're really telling me what you perceive as impossible, logically impossible, true, is nothing more than a created form of God of how to relate to reality and think it. But there is, in God's world, a reality beyond logic, beyond space, beyond physics. It's the world of his thought. The world of his thought, it was God, the source of all, is not defined or confined by physics, by science. He created it. He's not confined by logic because he created that too. So to ask what is the logical reason for God doing anything, who says he's working with logic? He created logic. Most of us do not live logical lives. Anybody overweight? Most of us do not live logical lives. Yet we demand God to be logical. Why? Logic is nothing more than a created form of behavior. He created it, so he wouldn't be governed by it. Why he does things, I don't know. Does he create things in a beautiful, logical way? Sometimes. Sometimes he doesn't. So you know what that's telling you? There's the word of God thinking to himself. That's in the Kodesh HaKodashim. And there he's not defined by man's comprehension. The root of things. And then this God, the way he translated himself to the finite world that we understand and relate to and touch of, feel, and that's in the Kodesh. Put it in very simple terms, when the Kohen Gadol comes into the Kodesh HaKodashim, he doesn't talk. He can barely talk. But this is not the place for thinking, for talking. It's a place for feeling and understanding. Beyond physics, beyond logos. It's beyond, he's in shock. And the crazy thing is that he takes the Keteris and puts it on a place which isn't place. He must freak out. Where does he put that Keteris? On the space between the two bottom of the Aharon. But the Aharon doesn't take space. So he's actually putting the Keteris. Man is walking into a place which defies physics, and he puts something on a place which doesn't exist. I would also be shocked. I would be encountering a reality beyond any iota of comprehension. Something which is because God is, but it makes no sense. So he doesn't talk at that stage. Only when he goes out does he say a tefillah k'tzara. You have that in your machzor and your shana and your kippur. Okay, then he says a tefillah k'tzara. This is a short prayer because he's still in shock. I would also. I mean, it'd be terrible shock. Thoughts of it. You're encountering something beyond. You actually finally understood there's God more than what you can understand. One calls that the world of thought. You can only think about it. And then there's the world of speech, of doing. The Kodesh is where God spoke. Oh, we understand what heaven and earth is. We understand what wisdom is. We understand what a table is. We understand parnasa. We understand chachma. We understand so many things. The truth of the matter is, it all lies in that covenantal relationship which defies logic and the laws of physics. That's the Aharon. That's the tablets. That's the tablets of the covenant. You go there and realize that we start with something which is God's will and thought, the meaning and purpose, which is beyond, many times beyond our comprehension. And that afterwards is translated into practical life. You know what the Parachis is? The Parachis is that place which translates infinite meaning into practical tools. Where you move from this great philosophical encounter of the Aharon of doesn't take space. It's the medium, it's like the halfway house, which helps us translate that into practical life. Parnasa, Chachma, Kapara, etc. It's called that thing which helps us connect the world of thought and meaning to the world of practical reality and action and speech. You know the worst thing that happened in the Second Temple? Is, on one hand, there was so much learning happening then. Your Gemara and your Mishnah are written in that period of time. So much learning happening then. So many great things. But there was a rupture between the world of thought and the world of speech. The Gemara says one of the major catalysts of why the Second Temple was destroyed, they didn't see God in the book. They didn't look for meaning or purpose. They just did it by rote. And they were champions in doing it by rote. They did it very well. The Gemara says that is why they didn't say Birkat HaTorah. Ama avda haaretz shelo birchu b'Torah tchila. Couldn't say Birchas HaTorah. The way we say it here, believe me, they could say it. What's the problem? How long does it take? A minute. Why were they stingy in saying Birkat HaTorah? Do you ever wonder what Birchas HaTorah is? Asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim v'natan lanu et Torato baruch atah Hashem noten haTorah. What are you saying there? So you've chosen us to be different. You feel different? You know why you're different? Because you have a covenantal relationship with God, and He expressed that by giving you the Torah at Sinai. I'm different because I have a covenantal relationship because I was at Sinai, and you were at Sinai, and all of us were at Sinai. And we have this unique relationship with Sinai, and Sinai's covenantal relationship expressed itself in those two tablets. They're called Luchot Abrit, the tablets of the covenant. You know what why are you saying that now? And when you're learning, I'm learning Baba Kama. I don't know what. The answer is you're not just supposed to learn Baba Kama. You're not supposed to learn Chumash, Gemara, Mishnah. You're supposed to reconnecting to your covenantal relationship. Every time you look at that book, you say, oh, I'm going back to Sinai. I'm going back to Sinai. You just heard Kriyat Torah. Why do you think Kriyat Torah you have to have 10 people for it? It's a metaphor for the total nation, Tzibur, that was at Sinai. Why do you have 3 aliyot? Kohanim, Leviim, Yisraelim, because that was the nation at Sinai. Another reason for the 3 aliyot is because it's Torah, Nevi'im, and Ketuvim. I'm reading Chumash now. Why do I care about Nevi'im and Ketuvim? Because all that, the source of it all, as the Ramban explains, comes from Sinai. You realize that we hear Kriyat Torah, we're supposed to be reenacting the Sinai experience. That's actually supposed to be happening. We're supposed to reenact the Sinai experience. Kriyat Torah, okay, I want an Aliyah, Mishaberach. No. Did you think what you're doing here? You're standing in front of Sinai. Birchas Torah is D'oraita. According to some Shitos, well, it's one of 2 brachos which are biblical. That's the Ramban. Birchas wasn't biblical, grace after meals, and Birkat Torah, blessing the Torah before you teach it, before you learn it. It's obviously very important. It's actually very important. God does not want you opening His book unless you see Him in the book. God does not, He's not really interested in you reading book without seeing Him. He doesn't want to see you learning without the context of a covenantal relationship. That was missing. They cut away the Kodesh from the Kodesh HaKadoshim. They were willing to deal with the practical laws. I can tell you all the halachas of menorah, all the halachas of parnasa. I can tell you all the practicalities of religion. But the Kodesh HaKadoshim, the Aharon, the covenantal relationship, the meaning behind it, the why, what does it do, where does it lead to? That's not what they were thinking of. So were great sugya splitters, if I may say, but were devoid of any religious consciousness, which thus allowed the immorality of that period, the terrible fighting and sinas chinam. Where does sinas chinam come from? Sinas chinam comes from people don't share, they're not really friends. When you're a friend because you only want to use the other person because you're lonely, you only keep him as a friend as long as you need him. And when he disagrees with you, when he sings out of tune, you turn your back on him. They weren't friends. Oh, they were friends of the TV program over there. You know what I mean? Each one using the other for your own pleasure. But as the Rambam says, a real friend is someone that you can trust that he will never turn his back on you. Even when you sing out of tune, literally he says this. And that can really only be if you're a chaver ledavar na'aleh. You're a friend which shares a mutual lofty goal, value. If you both have a very lofty goal, a value that you all want to share, then you're all real friends, because that goal, that value ties you all together. So don't you see how Bayit Sheni, that second Commonwealth, which was rife with Sinat Chinam, read Flavius, but the different factions killing each other. Okay? You understand why? They may have been religious. Excuse me, they may have been observant, but they were not religious. Religion is a state of mind. Observance is a state of action. They had cut away the Kodesh from the Kodesh HaKadoshim. So when the Chazal teaches that he cut the paraiches, and he cut the connecting factor between the Kodesh, the world of thought, and the world of speech. And God says, little boy, you didn't do it. The Jews did it themselves. They did it themselves. You think you're doing it, but you're grounding ground flour. We did it. We did it because we decided to ignore the Kodesh HaKadoshim, decided to ignore the God of religion. We transformed it from a religious world of experience into just a lawyer's religion. It's like a laundry list. Do this, do this, do this, do this, do this. God help me. We didn't share anything with anybody. We became very self-centered. The idea of the blood of the paraiches is very, very fascinating. You know, we see in the scriptures that blood, so to speak, is the place of the nefesh. You can't, we respect blood of an animal. We will not, if an animal, when we slaughter, we cover that blood. Right? We take a chicken, we cover the blood. That's kisui adam. Why? So Nachmanides explains you should respect the life of the animal. You don't take it for granted. You respect that life, and respect, you cover that blood. It's an act of respect. We can only use that blood for the service on the altar, because that's actually elevating the animal's life. Okay? But just for kapara, just for atonement on the mizbech is where we can use the blood openly. Otherwise, for your own usage, you must respect that blood. And why only the blood? And the answer is, also you can't eat blood. You can't drink blood. And the pasuk says, "Ki nefesh adam badam, nefesh achai badam hu." Your nefesh lies in your blood. Now, what does that mean? Goodness sakes, a nefesh doesn't take space. And if you get a blood transfusion, you're not getting a new soul. You know what I mean? So, what does it mean that your nefesh is in your blood? It's obvious that without going into lengthy discussion, the neshama has many names. One of the names is nefesh. Nefesh means that aspect of the soul, which is the source of your being organic matter, which is alive. The property of life is called nefesh. Your neshama, that's something bigger and higher. So many things. Your nefesh is not when you die, leaves the body. There's no more expression of that nefesh, but there's still neshama, etc. Your nefesh means that aspect of the soul which is the source of the gift of life. Now, for goodness sakes, let's go back to biology. What's life? Constant rejuvenation of the cell system, it was the definition of an organism to be called alive. Should the cells cease to rejuvenate, it is dormant and dead. It deteriorates. That's what it is. And the only way those cells will rejuvenate constantly if they constantly have nutrients. And the only river through which those nutrients will arrive is the bloodstream. Equals the ultimate expression of the rejuvenation of cells causing organic matter to be called alive is the bloodstream. Nefesh Adam Badam, this symbolizes, this is the ultimate expression of life. The fact that that murky red river is actually very vibrant and shipping these nutrients everywhere constantly, and that's why you're alive. When someone's dead, his blood is spilt. That's a metaphor. You know what it means? His blood became meaningless. It transformed from being a river of life into just a murky puddle. That's why we say someone is shofech damim, you spilled blood. I throttled the guy, no blood was spilled. Yet we say you spilled blood. Yes, it means you made it meaningless. Drops of blood equals death. It means yes, the blood became meaningless. It's no more the great Mississippi. You think in America of moving things from Louisiana up to Montana. No. Now it's St. Louis. Now it's just a murky puddle. That's shfichus damim. You made it meaningless. You see what happened? What Titus was doing, and he thought he did it. I'm going to make this paraichus meaningless. That's why God said, put those. That's what the blood. Those drops of blood were. Yes, it is meaningless. The paraichus was meaningless because the paraichus is only meaningful if you contemplate on the Kodesh HaKodashim and you want to transmit the ideas of a Kodesh HaKodashim into your daily life. You want to constantly take the meaning, the purpose, the context of religion into proper action. You want to see God in the Chumash. You want to see Sinai when you open up a Tehillim. I want to see Har Sinai when I learn Baba Kama. That's what I'm supposed to be doing. And if not, God says, do me a favor, go somewhere else. You have to say Birkat Torah. But they weren't doing it anyway. So you know what? The Kodesh HaKodashim was defunct. And therefore the paraichus was meaningless. And this is the story of the blood going out of the paraichus. What we have to take from this is quite obvious. We should be mourning that because I suffer from that today. Okay? 2023, long time after, and it's still a challenge. Because you get used to things, as I mentioned before. And then you daven like you're sending Morse code. You know, just to say Bichsa Torah, can you think of every word? Think what you're saying. I am now entering Sinai. What are you saying? Have you thought about it? It's no joke why the Baltanya writes that a normal shachris should take 3 hours. I understand. People didn't go to work there, I guess. Or they woke up very early. I mean, but really, I'm thinking of it. How could you say that bracha without creating an imagery of what you're doing? I'm connecting the Kodesh HaKodashim to the Kodesh. I'm bringing the world of thought and translating it into action. It's such a beautiful blessing. How could you not say it? I'm not joking when you say any bracha. No, you take an apple and you say, God, let there be more understanding that you, God, our Lord, is the creator of the fruit of trees. Last time you took an apple, did you take it for granted, or did you just say, right, or something like that? Did you say, why I wish I understood more the godliness of creation, which is expressed in this tree, in this apple? If we'd actually say these things and mean them, we would be different people. No, we can always say it's the human condition. That's my territory too. Don't worry about it. We're all in the same boat. But if you don't dream, life without a dream is terrible. The redemption, the greatest thing of redemption is, usually you dream about things until you have them. And then once you have them, you stop dreaming, which is terrible. And God says, B'shuv Hashem es Shivat Zion, when finally we will be redeemed, we will still continue dreaming. Isn't that beautiful? We'll never stop dreaming because there's always more. Always more. This is usually a bracha I give to Chassan Akala under a chuppah. It says, I really bless you that hopefully you will always be dreaming about each other. And I think that's what God is telling us. And if we don't understand these goals and we don't dream about them, then life is very empty. Will you attain them? Each his own. Each of us has different properties and a different soul and different gifts and different capabilities. So I don't know how high you will climb the Everest. But as long as your boots are made for walking, and that's what you will do, then believe me, wherever you get by the end of life, that's where you were supposed to be. God just wants us to walk, wants us to dream, you'll never be perfect. There's no such thing as a perfect person. No such thing as a perfect father. I can tell you that. No such thing as a perfect wife. No such thing as a perfect anything. There's only one thing which is perfect: death. You're perfectly dead. You ain't going anywhere else. Outside of death, there's nothing else which is perfect. It's the truth. Just think of it for a minute. I'm perfectly dead. I'm not perfectly anything else. Okay? But God wants you, no one wants you to be perfect. He wants you to perfect yourself. Dream about it. Go for it. Try to connect the world of thought to the world of action. We lost that already in Second Temple. We should pray a lot of. We should only start thinking. That's all it takes. Start thinking. Just, you can't daven everything immediately because take one bracha a day and mean it. Can make a suggestion. Just say Moida Ani. Take 5 minutes. Wake up 5 minutes early. Say Moida Ani and mean every word. I really thank you, God. L'fanecha, you're standing in front of me. I got to tell you a story. Do you mind? When I was a young boy, I learned in Lubavitch under the tutelage of a great man. His yortzeit was this week, Rabbi Khan. And Rabbi Khan, Zechar Levracha, he used to sit with the Bachrim, and he used to take one guy that he liked, and he would drink a bit, and then he would use him and talk to him directly, and through that teach the crowd. It was a very special thing. So I was his kapora chicken, and Rio says, he called me by my nickname, that doesn't matter at the moment here, and he says, in Yiddish, it's much sharper, but I'll say it in English, you lie thrice daily. No, what do you want from me? This is abusive. Today you put him in jail, but you lie thrice daily. Why? So he says, why? What's the first thing you say in the morning? Modeh ani lefanecha. I admit in front of you. Those are your 3 lies every morning. You're moide. You really are? Are you? Moide means I admit and I thank. Do you really think you were dead, now you're alive? Are you thankful for your life? I'm a 12-year-old kid. What does this man want from me? Ani. I. Which I? The I of yesterday, the I of tomorrow, the I of yesteryear. You have so many eyes. Do you know which I you are? And then lefanecha. And he looks at me, he gives me his little cheek, says, when's the last time he was in front of you? Lefanecha means you were in front of me. When's the last time you encountered God in front of you? So you say 3 lies every morning. You don't think of what you're saying. Now, he didn't think I was going to suddenly understand everything then. Okay, little baby. We start dreaming about it. Start dreaming about, are you modeh? Who is the ani? And when will he ever be lefanecha? Do that. 3 words. I'm not asking you to do more. Because I was trained at the age of 12. You know what? I'm 74 almost. And I'm still working on it. So, not bad. Okay? It's a long time past. I'm still working on it. But you know something? Come a long way, baby. Got it. Somewhere, but it's still not on the top of the Everest. Got a long climb to go. I guess my goal is not to get to the top. But that's the real goal. Real goal, can you have a real relationship with God? Can you connect the world of thought to the world of speech? Can you put your heart and your mind in the words you say? And the deeper you learn, and the more you work, and you believe me what the rabbi said, you tear off layers of yourself. And it can be painful. And you really need a lot of self-confidence to be able to do this. Someone has to empower you to make you believe that you can do this. I love you all. Oh, I'm doing my best to empower you. But you got a great rabbi, let him do the job. Someone has to empower you to be able for you to be ennobled. But that's the goal of life. The goal of life is to peel away the mascara. As my father-in-law always said, this girl, until you kiss her, you have to make a bar minimum zionus. You know, can you peel away the bar minimum zionus to get to the skin? Can you peel away the layers that you have to get to yourself? Who are you for real? Not what society has painted on you. Not the smileys. Okay, now I have to smile because Aunt Sadie says so. Oh, it's sad, right? I put one of those droopy things. No. Are you really happy? Have you ever really been happy? Ever really been sad? Or is your projected image? I wonder, have you ever really been happy? It's late, so I won't tell you a story, but I owe you one. I had great people in my life which challenged me, which, you know, a good teacher is not the one which just feather beds you. You need that too. But the one that tears your face off. Because he knows there's a better face under it. So please. I'm going to share a very private moment with you, and this is going to stop because I can go on forever. On my second date with the lady I married, okay, this is going, oh, well, she'll kill me, but I'm going to do it anyway. She looks at me and says, I was this pompous, you know, best boy in the school type of thing, you know, right tie, right ring, right scarf, you know, Phi Beta Kappa, you know, the works, you know what I mean? She looks at me and says, you know, if you take that mask off, you'd actually be a good guy. I says, wow, this is my teacher. We're married. But that's someone trying to find out who you really are. And you need someone to help you. So I will tell us all, you know, we take our masks off, we're going to find a very good guy. That will only work by connecting to Kodesh HaKadoshim, by asking always who we are, where we're coming from, where we're going to, in everything we do. Let's say the Kinnot. זכור אשר סוצר בבפנים, שלף חרבו בו לפני ולפנים, נחלצנו באש כתמי לחם הפנים, ויגידי פרחת בעלת שני פנים, ישמים גאל ברגן מאדם, וימדד קו כמראה אדם דם, מימנו דלך והזכיר חיציו בדם, כי יצא מן הבייס וחרבו מלא אדם. ההגויסי הבויס גבר, ונטע אל ידי למולי לגבר, מצרים וכל העם לבוא לגבר, אני בתך עבויו, ארץ עליו בצבור, אביסנו זרע כי הכניסי בחרוב ואוכלה אש, על פסח הבייס החל לבוי, ביד אבו, שהתאפסרו ולחיבוי, הצד מערבי לזכי ישריד בוי, וצגף ובשגו, Ich nicht von den ich war ich. Aber dem Chitzu beteiligt dabei ich. Alme bebeis ich mit meinem Schalach ich. In Abschino Tavan Kreuzikli Schores Sommer bei nie Schayid beim Neuschores. Wir reden und Maki ich gehe mich Schores weil man zu Tisch im Schleiche Kreis. Noshim Kosharu Kibom Ovitz. Bikaka Bais na love Chrit sorry in Lupos und bei Paris bei Beis Kodesh Kodashim Tzachanas Ishritz. Bachurim Ibachut Sagu Bachuzakim. Besoru ki Yuzag Bishishim Riboy Mazikim. Skenim Nivasu ki Yoshu Bischakim. Asois Tzoinoi Hu Asu Bezakim. Shabbat Saitem V'Yavei Admoin. V'Yisavev Chemo V'Yavei Samoin. Nofle Evroel Nine Pizza Lach V'Luz V'Amoin. Ad Kinnot Tashmidoi Karmo. No Pesach Harabai Zechel Avoy B'Yadabai. V'Sheitav Sorov Lachri Voy V'Atzad Ma'aravi V'Zeche Yisrid Voy V'Tzagachos Leinu V'Yarav Voy. Ata Katzapta V'Sheisa L'Fanois. Yiladim Asheim B'Hem Kama Misham Le'Panois. Lama Lok Shugoyim L'Shato Ela Mincha Penois. V'Shucham Be'etz Utz V'Shala Yisfunois. Hashivenu Shivu Kevo V'Nivchayom. Shitvu Atzmom Yichad Lipol Bayom. Shivetish B'Chesay V'Al Yom. Ki Alel Ragnu V'Mtzuleis Yom. Kitoim V'Zmanu Bo Ad Nafshom. Kol Zois Ba'asnu V'Leshachnu Chachil Mashashom. Tikva Samnosnu Meishim B'Shonu Baskon Nishmo Uva Allah Matishan.
Can you test? $19.
Okay. This is the stage in which we realize we have to take responsibility and we're ashamed. Till now, we describe terrible things that happened. It's actually the first Kinnot, which we really start taking responsibility. Just let's read a bit of it. L'cha Hashem hazdaka, yours, my Lord, is the righteousness. Because of all the wondrous sounds you've displayed from then until now. But us, Boshes hapanim, we're ashamed. You've displayed, basically, we've been, because of all the trials which you sought us to refine us, as a result of our failure, you despise us. We finally admit failure. You're so righteous, you extricated a nation from within a nation with miracles. And what did we do? We're so ashamed. In the terrible things, the hypocrisy, the actions that we did, we did not reciprocate. You were good, we were stupid. God went to redeem a nation, took us out of Egypt. The Lord upon him, we're so ashamed. Do you realize that when we crossed the Red Sea, we had a Avodah Zarah in our pockets? It's frightening. After a whole year of miracles, and the sea is being split. That is pretty eerie. And God is there, you can see it. And yet we have the alternative. We have, so to speak, my wife is so good to me, but I have my girlfriend in my pocket. We're very ashamed. It's interesting. We're talking about the idea of shame. And it goes on and says, you've been good, and we're ashamed. we're good, and you're ashamed. It finally ends. L'cha Hashem hatzedakah b'shteichu banot shecharvu b'bitzenu v'anachnu kayamim. Far end of it. You're so righteous. The two temples and two commonwealths which were destroyed because of our actions. This is the first time where we say this. It's our fault. And yet we are alive. Unbelievable. You want us, after we did everything wrong, we messed up 2 marriages, and we still didn't get a divorce. Do you know at the end of the first temple, the Jews were sure that God had divorced them. They came to Ezekiel, the prophet, and they said, what does he want from us now? Why are you coming to rebuke us? He threw us out of the house. Obviously, there's been a divorce. So what does he want now? Literally, in Medrash and the Gemara, Isha Shegirsha Baila, a lady which was divorced. What does he want now? Why is he complaining? And God told them, Aye get krisus imchem. Where exactly is the bill of divorce? It means I never gave you a divorce. We're not divorced. We're tied at the hip. Sorry. It's just we have to have these phases up and down because that's the way you are. But no, I will never leave. I will never leave. Do you know the tragedy of the feast of Achashverosh the Jews went to? Do you know what that feast was? That feast was, if you read the Tactractic, Gemara, and Megillah, was a celebration that the 70 years after destruction came and the redemption did not come. It was a celebration of the divorce of God from his nation. And these idiots, these Jews, went and partook of that feast. Oh, we had a divorce. Let's have a divorce party. That's what it was. Well, we're divorced, and this is a divorce party. Bottoms up. Freedom. That angered God terribly. If you thought you're divorced, I would expect you to mourn. And you actually make a party out of it. It's frightening. And then God, behind the scenes, teaches them that he's always there and you'll never not have him. And that's the story of Megillah Esther, if you look carefully. Of everything is behind the scenes. And the name of God even isn't written in the Megillah. It's God behind the scenes. Trying to tell them, you may not always see it openly. He never left you. He never left you. I remember having this conversation with my father, going back for shul once on a Motzei Shabbos. And you must remember in those days, the neighborhood was full of Holocaust survivors. But it wasn't like Pinchas Gutter, which really exudes belief, etc. But in those days, there were a lot of people who were very angry with God, and they turned their back on him. But they said, hey, you turned your back on us, we turned your back on you. Many people stopped putting on tefillin, etc., keeping Shabbos, even believing in God, marrying out in order to not be Jewish anymore. Common. And this was the neighborhood. And I remember going back from shul and asking Dad, how come we're religious? He says, what do you mean? He says, you lost a son, a wife, 12 siblings. I have no family because they're all burnt. He walked out on you. When you're a little kid in that age, in that era, you ask these questions. We grew up a little faster than other people because so there's whole books about my generation. We're a little crazy, workaholics, etc. We're obsessed people because at very young ages, we asked very, very difficult questions. And our parents, it wasn't easy for them to talk about or answer. They also had questions. I thank God for my father's Zechron. He told me, I remember he telling me, he says, Mendele, he called me, says, you'll never understand this, but I want you to know. Wherever I was, he never left me. Namish, the way Pinchas said it yesterday, if you listen to it attentively, I think that was a sikha before Kol Nidre, to listen to the chizik I got from that. It took me back to my youth. This is my daddy told me. He says, you'll never understand this. You won't be able to understand this because you're not there. But you should know he never left me. Do you think I understand him? No. Many years since, but I know I'm going to sound like a little baby. But my daddy told me that he never left it. And I believe my daddy. I do. So that is something very special. That is something that the Jews had to find out. They felt divorced to the extent that they even partied about it. But they had to learn that God never leaves them. And that's the story of Purim, if you want to know, that God never leaves us. So we say we're very ashamed. We're very ashamed that there are two temples, two destructions, L'cha Hashem Tzedakah, B'shnei Chubanot, Shecharvu B'bitz'enu, two Chubanot which happened because of us, because of what we did, V'anachnu kayamim, but we're still here. Would you believe it? We're still here as a people, as a nation, as a religion. And this, for me, Anachnu Kayamim means, and I'm still religious. And I still believe in you. And I'll put my life down for you. And I hope and pray that my generations after me will all love you. But you killed my brother. He was 2 years old. Okay? And I say Kaddish for him. But you're right. Hashem is the call. You're still with me. I don't know why you do things, God. I've given up trying to be your lawyer. But I know one thing, you never leave us. Which means to say whatever happens, you must know what you're doing because you never walk away. And we've given you all the reasons to walk away. Won't do it. We're really tight to the hip. And I'm ashamed. What is this idea of shame? I want to explain something to you. Are you really ashamed? That's a question. Are you ashamed of the fact that God is so good to us where we're really jerks? Do you ever feel shame? Can you honestly say this and mean it? Are you really ashamed? What's the sensation of shame? Have you ever tried to analyze the sensation of shame? Okay, I'll analyze through, I don't need a book for this. For me, it's just a self-analysis. You know what shame is? Every person has a projected image. That's how he sees himself. When all of a sudden somebody busts that balloon and destroys that image, you're ashamed. You feel yourself has been shriveled or destroyed. That's what the Gemara says, that anybody shames anybody, it's as if he's killing him. Gemara says, if you shame somebody publicly, you're literally murdering him. The Gemara says that there was a Tana that because he was afraid to shame somebody, endangered his own life, went into a hot oven. He may have got killed because he'd rather get killed than shame somebody because that's like killing somebody. Are you aware of that? Shaming somebody is destroying his persona, destroying his sense of self, destroying his self-confidence, destroying his stature. That's destroying somebody. People don't realize that you don't have to murder people by sticking the throat. You can murder people by ignoring them. You can murder people definitely by shaming them and destroying their stature, but you can destroy their stature by turning your back and ignoring them too. The Gemara says that if they find some person in the road and he's dead, he was murdered, so the elders of the city have to go out and bring a certain hefta over there, whatever it is, egla rufa, and they have to confess. And they have to say, Yadenu lo shafchat adam hazeh. Our hands did not spill this man's blood. I can imagine. Rabbi Feinstein or Aaron Kotler All these old rabbis get together. We did not murder him. Of course you didn't. So the Gemara says, you know what it means? If a person, a traveler, which is lonely, and comes to the city, and the city hasn't arranged for him, first of all, a hotel, places to eat and drink, and then people to walk him on his way out to show that we care about you, not just to give him food and drink, but to show that we care, that we're going to walk you out, then you basically made him vulnerable because he felt ignored. And if he's vulnerable, it's easy to kill him. People who have confidence in themselves, what to live for, will fight for their lives. People who have nothing to live for won't fight for their lives. If we ignored you, we made you vulnerable, we killed you. No, that's why the halacha is, just want you to know, that a person comes to your house, you're supposed to walk him out for Amos. It's halacha. Why? You're telling him, I'd love to continue being with you, but just impossible. So I'm starting the trip with you. That's what you're doing. Every time you walk someone, not to the door, outside of the door for Arba Amos. To the door means, okay, I want to make sure you're out of here. Outside of the door means to say, I want to walk with you. That's empowering a person. That's giving a person a feeling that he's not alone. That is the person you've built the statue, you're giving him life. Taking away that feeling, making a person feeling that he's alone, busting his sense of self, that's murder. That's shame. You know what this is? You're so good to me. My sense of self is dead because I realize I am really not. This is too much for me. I can't take this for real. It doesn't make sense. Why are you so good to me? You're making me feel so small. I'm shriveling in my personality. You're overwhelmingly good. I'm ashamed. I really am ashamed. That sense of shame of feeling that God's goodness is so overwhelming, and I'm really not worth it. At least I don't feel worth it. God keeps on telling me, you are. Nice of you. But I don't feel that way. But that's a very important thing to have. Because we will never change anything. We'll never get better unless we have this sense of shame. Because until we have that sense of shame, we'll be stuck with taking things for granted. It's only with shame that topples that sense of sanctimonious fellow. Well, I'm good. We're doing not. No. I guess we have to seek this sense of shame. To destroy that projected image. To find out who we are and say thank you and mean it. So this is this Kinnot. Let's say it together. L'cha Hashem Hatzdaka. Lanu Baishas Apani. Azvadato. Lanu Baishas Apanim B'Bchina Shenitzraftu V'Yisanu Tiyavta. L'Adacha Adinai Hatzdaka. V'Goy Mikev Goy L'Kachta B'Masois. Lanu Baishas Apanim B'Deifer Shenimtza Bonu B'Masein Asois. L'Cha Adinai Hatzdaka B'Alcha Yisrael Elohim L'Vesel L'Am. Lanu Baishas Apanim V'Yamru Al Yamsuf Goy Be'Lahav B'Sham. L'Cha Adinai Hatzdaka B'Zeichel B'Atem Adai V'Ani Elohim. Lanu Baishas Apanim B'Chafenu Adinai B'Sin Kum Aseilanu Elohim. L'Cha Adinai Hatzdaka B'Tamshi Tamtonu B'Tzapichus B'Dvash. Lanu Baishas Apanim B'Yamikravnu L'Fanav Soilis V'Shemen U'Dvash. L'Cha Adinai Hatzdaka B'Kikul Manu Be'er V'Amud Anan. Lanu Baishas Apanim B'Lechem HaKlokel Aviseinu Bo'aleim B'Rognom. L'Cha Adinai Hatzdaka B'Midbar L'Chasanu Davar. Lanu Baishas Apanim B'Ni Atzois Lavan V'Chatzerois V'Yizahav Kimedubar. L'Cha Adinai Hatzdaka B'Sichain V'Oig V'Chol Mamlechos Kinnot. Lanu Baishas Apanim B'Ochan Asher Ma'al B'Cherem B'Nimtzei Man. L'Cha Adinai Hatzdaka B'Po'al Asher Pa'alta B'Arbaasa Mashiim. L'Chanu Baishas Apanim B'Tzelem Micha Ki Boi Anachnu Pashim. L'Cha Adinai Hatzdaka B'Kimas Shile V'Nevi Givayim B'Beis Olamim. לא נבש את הפנים ברשע שנמצא בנו בחשכו ובם אנו נכלמים. לכן הצדקה בשתיכו בנו שחרבו ביצענו ואנחנו קיימים. לא נבש את הפנים בשובנו אליך בכל לב שתשוב אלינו ברחמים. לכן הצדקה בשמה שונה שעשו שנאה כבושות ולשמה. ולא נבש את הפנים בטווי איש חמודו ישחטא אלוהי אוזנך ושמע. Where do you go next?
248.
Oh God. This is a Kinnot, which is parallel to the, this is told the story of the Asar Arugei Malchut, the 10 Tanaim, which were murdered in the destruction of the Second Commonwealth. One has to understand what this really is. We say this on Yom Kippur, something like it, and we have a piyut on Yom Kippur, which discusses the murder of the 10 Tanaim, and we say this today. Well, say that Yom Kippur, Midrash says, if you read the piyut over there, in Yom Kippur, this was a kapara, cleaning up the sin of Mechirat Yosef. The original hate between brothers, which created actually the first exile, and the source of all exiles, which was Egypt, was done with, there were 9 brothers there. 9 brothers there. And the 10th one that agreed to them was God. The Gemara says that's the reason why 10 Tanaim had to die. Had to die. And the one was parallel to God was Rabbi Akiva. 10 brothers took the 11th brother. Remember, Binyamin was not there. There were 12 brothers. Okay, so 10 sold the 11th, and the little baby was home, Binyamin. So who are the 10 brothers? Who is the 10th? Who are the? Gemara says over there. So what we're talking. Oh, and Ruvain was not there because he had gone away for a moment. So you only really had 9 brothers there. So the 10th person which agreed to that sale was God, it says. Because God understood this is the process of history. But God himself, so to speak, metaphorically needs a kapara. And the kapara of him was Rabbi Akiva. It's frightening to think about that, what this means. What does it mean when great people, their lives are taking for the kapara for Klal Yisrael? What does it mean? Why should they die for old sins? Well, it's obvious that the leaders of the generation represent the national body, for they are the teachers. They're disseminators of the wisdom of the culture. They're the people which actually have the influence. Ultimately, when a generation is in failure, those people who had the influence and were not successful have somewhat of a deficiency. It's the truth. We carry responsibility. We all carry responsibility for everything. Kol Yisrael Arevim Zeh Lezeh. As I mentioned once in the Shiddur, Yisrael Salanter says that a boy in Slobodka, in Yidlita, doesn't learn well during night Seder, a Jewish student in Paris is lighting up a cigarette on Shabbos. you ever think about that? Do you know why you daven b'lashon rabim, not b'lashon yachid? You're constantly praying plural. Rifa'inu, baruch aleinu, chaneinu. You're not, hey, I got this private issue between you, God. Even Shema Kuleinu, which you can assert your private prayers, yeah, it's in context of listen to everybody. There's no I there. It's all us. Because the relationship of God to the person is through the collective. Through you being a part of Klal Yisrael, that's why you're spoken to. Because you're part of that big neshama called Klal Yisrael, that God has a relationship with your private neshama. Tanya writes in the 32nd chapter, if people would only realize we're actually one big soul, just put in different bodies. They would understand then V'hafta Racha Kamoicha is a very simple mitzvah. Because, you know, who is I? I remember we had this conversation many years ago. No, who is the I at the end of the day? Not my body. I've gained and lost weight like the angels on Jacob's ladder going up and down. So that's not it. It's not my psychological profile. I hopefully have developed. Does my wife have to have a new marriage with me when I became a better person? Do I have to remarry her after a diet? No. So the I that's married to my wife has nothing to do with my body or my psychological profile. Who is it? Who's married? Really, I'm serious. Who's married? And I don't mean the inner eye of a psychological, no, that's not true because the psychological profile changes. If it doesn't change, you're in a bad place. You can't even recall your psychological profile when you were a baby, but believe me, you've come a long way, for good or for bad. Things have changed. Was there a different you then? Do you need a special birthday for every time you learn some Musar? Who's I? Who's married to my wife? Who is the father of my children? Who is it? It's got to be something stable, which goes through phases. I've got to come to the conclusion my body goes through phases, definitely. I used to have a big bush of hair, you know what I mean? I need 4 pins to keep my kippah on. That was a long time ago. You know, that's my peacock vanity went. Okay, that gone, and I don't wear a wig. You know, now you can do Kiddush Levana on my skull. You know what I mean? Let's face it. You know, reflects the moon. You know, that's not it. Not my body. Believe me. I'm telling you, I have suits. I wear this black thing on Shabbos, frocks, this long coats. I have so many different sizes there, depending on how much shont I eat that week. You know what I mean? Give me a break. That's not the body. Not me. That really goes through phases. But I have to Kiddushin every week for another, you know, remarry my wife, renew my vows. Now, what do I have which is constant and yet goes through phases? But it's constant. X factor. Jews call it a soul. There's nothing else which is constant. Everything is material, therefore has a beginning and ending, constantly in change and flux. The only thing which is constant is that entity called the soul. That's constant. Well, each society will give it different names. You can decide, because if you wouldn't have that, you could never say you have a past. To be constant, that means you have a past, you have a future, and you have a present. But if you're nothing more than an accumulation of experiences, the ups and downs of the body and the psychological persona, so you don't have a past, that was someone else. That was someone else. Isn't that what we do on Yom Kippur? We tell God, oh, that wasn't me, that was someone else. That's Dr. Jekyll, I'm Mr. Hyde. You know what I mean? No. You're the same guy. Get that straight. You may have had different phases, but there's the same one you there. That's why we can talk about ourselves in one form. I am married, thank God, have been, will be, etc. I was born year X and I will exit in year Y, but there's one I there. Logically, the only thing possible is to say there's some kind of a metaphysical entity which is constant and not organic matter, therefore is not changed, not in flux and doesn't change. That's called my soul. So when I look in the mirror, I really should be seeing a soul embodied in a body, okay? It expresses itself through a psychological profile, and those things are in flux. And my soul will express itself differently through those different tools of its psychological profile. So sometimes my soul will express itself in goodness, and sometimes it will express itself as being a jerk. And sometimes it'll physically express itself in a bloated belly, and sometimes someone will get back to normal, and so on and so forth. Would you imagine thinking that way, that you are nothing more than your soul and your body is nothing more than a good suit? Think of that. Think of the word I. When we talk about the collective eyes in the neshama. So if I understand I is nothing more than my neshama, do you understand? Your neshama is nothing more than part of a great metaphysical entity called the nation of Israel. Tanya writes this. It's one neshama. The only reason I think you have your private one, but that aspect of that great neshama in that body has a private name. It's one neshama. One neshama. Has different bodies. Just like my private neshama goes through different bodies, believe me, it goes up and down. Well, the great neshama of Klal Yisrael is expressed in the personalities of different people. We all actually the same I. Sit back, spoke on it, but whatever, meditate on it, and think about it. We're all one I. That's what the Tanya writes. If people would actually think about this, the mitzvah of V'ahavta Racha Kamocha would be easy. Love your friend as yourself, because he is yourself. You're the same I. The only reason we don't see it that way, because we look at our bodies, our psychological profiles, our specific gifts, which is true. But those things have phases. They change. They're not the initial basic I. And that neshama yearns for something. That neshama wants one thing only. It wants to go back to its source. It wants to go back and connect to its source. That mezvil inski kol neshama is nothing more than an expression of God. Chelek Elokai Mimal. One God. The only agenda of that neshama is Ani, I, Kivas Elokim, Litov. Closest to God is what makes me happy. Now here's a Gemara that says all this. So now I quoted a Tanya with Chasidus. It's a Gemara. The Gemara says in Sukkah that Hillel used to go into the Mikdash during the partying of Sukkot, joyful, and he walked in. I can see him now flicking his suspenders, probably red. Imanikan hakolkan. You know what that sounds like? If I'm here, everything is here. It's like saying the party can start. You know what I mean? Sounds terrible. Hillel was an enormously humble person. So Rashi explains, Ani does not mean I personally. Ani is the name of God. Pasuk says, Va'ani b'toch hagolah. God, which is called Ani, is in Golus. It says, if Ani can, if God of Golus is here finally, then everything is here. You see how beautiful that is? The play of words of me equals God. Well, some people feel they're God. I don't mean that. I mean, me is nothing more than embodiment of my neshama, which is the expression of who am I? My X factor. It's called God's soul expressed in my body. It'd be so beautiful to understand that. So you understand what happens over here, that the teachers of the generation are the ultimate energizers of the collective I. They're the ones which are supposed to bring sustenance to the collective I, to the nation. And therefore the deficiencies of the nation are deficiencies in them too, for we are all one. You are all responsible for everybody because we are all one soul, and the teachers have greater responsibility than the students. It was the concept of Kol Yisrael, Arevim Zelazeh. The teachers carry a heavier load. They were given a gift. Well, a gift came with the responsibility. The gift is that they had and can and should influence and teach the world. It carries a heavy, heavy, heavy responsibility. The gift that we receive, the Torah, gives a responsibility for all of mankind, literally. And we carry the responsibility for that too. Something happens bad somewhere, the Navi says the Jew must look into introspection. Pasuk in Tzfanya, Hichrati Amim. I tore apart nations. I've laid corners of the earth desolate. Amarti, I said to you, Jew, living in Johannesburg, you just read the headlines. Terrible things happen somewhere, I'm sure. Achtir ioti, look for me, kri musar, take moral, ethical teaching. We have responsibilities. If the world is going apart because we're not doing what we're supposed to do. The truth. Atavar Chartanu, we were chosen, that carries a responsibility for all of humanity. Great people, very great people, took responsibility not just for themselves, not just for the students, not just for the community, not just for the nation, but even for all the Bnei Noach of the world. Very great people cared about everybody. Just the Yotzei Lubavitcher Rebbe Zichar Tzaddik Livracha, I can tell you honestly, he cared about the smallest child and about the lowliest person in Soweto. Yeah, because great people have responsibilities. So basically, it's because of that these Chachamim had to have a kapara. They had to be a kapara. They carry the sins of the generation because they have that responsibility. And that's the kapara of these great teachers, to atone for the deficiency, not just of it's not them, it's them as the collective, as the one neshama. And that's great people. Sometimes we lose them because we've been deficient and they carry that responsibility. But remember, we're deficient also if something terrible happens in, I don't know where, Zimbabwe. If we would really be better people, good things would happen in the world. We carry responsibility. I say, look at a newspaper, which actually tells the truth, and cry. I say, I carry responsibility for the fact there's a rift of Sinas Chinim in Eretz Yisrael. And I say, yes, we have to fix ourselves. Then maybe things will be better there. I say that to everybody, not just told, what do you think would happen in Israel lately? Maybe I should start saying davening sin shalom, a little more with kavana. Shalom Rav with a little more kavana. What about that? Why talk about politics, not talk about ourselves? I think this is the message coming out of this Kinnot. We look at the great teachers of Torah that aren't here anymore. These teachers which could have taught us so much, and they're not here anymore. Can you imagine if these teachers would have lived another 10 years? We'd have another 20 volumes of Shas Bavli. We have a limited amount of questions at Tanoim because they died. Can I imagine? Think of 10 more years of Rabbi Akiva's life. God help me. I'd have another Sifra, another Sifri, another half of Bavli. Oh, that went. We don't have that. Because God is not going to give great lessons if you barely understand the lessons you received. Don't you understand? We lost the capability of being so much richer because we haven't even enriched ourselves with what he has given us. Think of it. Think when you read this period, how much more we should strive to learn more, know more, understand more, become better people. Why do you think these people were taken away? They took away a font of knowledge, a font of understanding, a font of contemplation, a font of emotional intelligence. All of that was taken away. Why did they take it away from you? It's almost like taking back the Torah. Don't you understand? Don't you understand when you mourn, so to speak, mourn for the 24,000 students of Rabbi Akiva? What are you mourning about? You know, the whole Shas of Bavli is basically only started with 5 students of Rabbi Akiva. They were the remnant. 5 students of Rabbi Akiva. He had 24,000 that died, which percentages said there should have been at least 1 of 1,000 was worthy of being a Tana, the Gemara says. Okay, you would have basically out of 24,000, you'd have 24 more Tanoim. That means to say from 5 Tanoim, I got 20 volumes of Bavli. What happens if it would have had 30? 24 plus 5 is 30. God help me. It would be 6 times the volume. It would be 120 volumes just Talmud Bavli without art scroll. Can you imagine how much wisdom we are missing? Can you imagine how much insight? We would have been super people if we had all that. And God took it away from you. You know, when you think of Sphere, you think of what happened there also because people were not mechabed each other. They died because they lacked dignifying each other's opinion. That's what the Gemara says. They also didn't understand we're one soul in different bodies. And ultimately, dignifying a Jew is dignifying the neshama. Eze mechubad ha-mechabed es-habriyos. You know when you're honorable? Because you honor another. Because that other and you are one. If you give honor to someone else's identity, you're actually giving honor to your identity. Because we're one soul in different bodies. I wish we would understand that. We would understand the responsibility. We would understand, and it's a big responsibility. But we would understand the potential. We are one. We carry the responsibility. And I repeat again, God says, okay, guys, I guess you can't handle it. Too much information. I'm not going to stuff you with information. I need you to work on what you have. So he limited the scope. We've become poorer. Basically cutting the scope and hoping us to go into the depth. So I wish and pray that we should take this very seriously, this Isaiah Levanon. Let's read this Kinnot together. Isaiah Levanon, Adirei Torah, Balei Tresim b'Mishnah b'Gemara, Giborei Koyach Amalea b'Ta'ara, Damam Nishpach v'Nashta Gvura, Hinam K'toshei Harugei Malchut Asara, V'al Eila Ani Borchia, Ve'ini Nigra. Zois b'Zachriya Zak b'Mora, Chem Das Yisod Klei HaKodesh Nezer v'Torah, Torah Lev V'Doshim Meisu b'Misoch HaMura, Yadu Goral Mirishon Lacher Bura, Kinfel Goral HaRabban Shimon Pashat Savaro B'Chok Nigzrog Zera, the Rabban Shimon Chazar Egmon Largo b'Nefesh Nitzura, Mizer Aharon Shal b'Vakasha Livkoisa b'Nagvira, Not al Reshoy Nasan b'Akvoisav Menero HaTorah, Som Einav al Einav, Upiv al Piv ba'Avog Mura, Onav Amar Peh HaMizgaber b'Torah, Pitom Niknesa Olav Misa Mishuna v'Chamura, Tziva lahavshit es Reish b'Sar Achsira, Ki am ba'Eire Omru Nafshech Sichira ba'Eire, Yosha Poishit Esigiyam Kam Tfilin Pnitzes Bora, Zog Tzakov is das O Ilom ve'Eretz is Poirera, Macharav Viu es Rabbi Akiva, Oike Orim v'Technom bezu b'Sfora, V'Sorku et Psarev b'Masreik sheBarazel ishtabra, Yotzon nishmatoi be'echol u'baskol omro ashrecho Rabbi Akiva, Ufach tahor b'chol minei Torah, Ben bavoy Rabbi Yehuda acharav viu b'Shivon lev v'Azora, נהרג בן 70 שנה בידי ארגורה. Yoishe betainis hoye noki v'chosiv lachtet maro. Rabbi Chanina ben Tradion. Acho bakil kilois b'tzion shoro. Yoishe v'dorish sefer Torah imay v'kifua b'chavlis moira. Yasa hitzitu b'hem u'berchu b'sefer Kochu b'sefer Torah. Zwischen Shetzemei Nicha Liber Shelo Yomus Meiro Chosid Rabbi Shoi v'Soifer Haraguim Ama Meiro So Kuvish Dechul HaKlavim V'Lohu Kvar B'Kvura Yotze Baskara Lov Shelo Yiniach Kelum Mitoyes Moshe L'Shomro Achov Rabbi Chutz Pis B'Yem Evro Oif HaPerech Nisra V'Avro Piv K'Medura Tzadik Rabbi Loza Ben Shomua V'Achroin HaNereg B'Matkira Ei Me'erev Shabbos Hoyes Man Kiddush V'Kadish V'Yikra Sholpo Lovely Nichu B'Chaim L'Gemora. Yotze Nishmosa V'Bora Elihim Yoitzer V'Tzor Tzura Kohena V'Kohena Hisifu B'nei Avlola Nois B'Gora B'Skilos Chifo Chere Hereg V'Chenek Miyuchal L'Shara Niseres Imena Yochel Aroyo Yosef Zura Chazei Atnufa V'Shoika Truma Tofa Rei V'Akfira Yeite V'Adinoi V'lo Yosef Oidli Asro Ametz B'Kaim Koshalois Chelik Yaakov Moshe Beis Sora L'Tzedik Yimlech Melech Yamar Shabu Yemei Vrech V'Yorech Nisa V'Necha.
It's relating to the Churban of Europe.
284. What page?
384.
I'll take this one. Okay. This is a Kinnot written by a very beautiful person. I knew him. Shlomo Halberstam, he was the brother of a beautiful person. He also lost everything. He rebuilt his life in America. He had an unbelievable community. He was a very, 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 really a beautiful person. I mean, I knew him. My father was a follower of his community. So I got to meet him. This is a Kinnot that he wrote about the Holocaust. I actually have a problem talking about these things. Because as a child, I was quite angry at God. Maybe because my father told me things about the past. And I was very sensitive to the fact that I had a brother, which is not here. I actually put his name on my father's grave. And I always lived with a sense of responsibility, almost as if the lives of my 12 uncles and aunts, I have to vicariously live their lives with me. I always had that feeling that I guess, the eldest boy of the family, I have to carry that weight. And, when you're a little boy, you take these things very vividly. You wouldn't know because you probably didn't grow up in that type of reality, but yeah. And it can be a heavy load, and therefore it generated certain resentment. But why'd you have to do this? Why didn't they live? You're a little boy, so you don't have answers. And the truth is that most people around you couldn't give you answers. Definitely not the answer that a young boy would accept. And I remember one guy telling me, well, it's all for the good. I wanted to beat him up. Okay. All for the good? Well, tell it to the people that are ashes. Do they feel good about it? They feel good about it? No, they don't feel good about it. Or it will be good, but they're ashes. So who's it going to be good for? Who's it going to be good for? So don't tell me all for the good. Who's it going to be good for? The only thing that's going to be good is going to be good in the eyes of God. Or good in the eyes of people. That's a Gemara. Crazy Gemara. I actually had to teach this recently. The Gemara says that we say in Olenu L'Shabeach, Vayom Ahu, the day will come, Yeh Hashem Echad, God will be one, Ushmo Echad, and His name will be one. And the Gemara asks, what do you mean? Do we have two gods now? Do we have like a trinity? What does it mean? He will have only one name and it'll be only one God. The Gemara says today, we have a split relationship with God. We look at the letters of His name in the Siddur and the Chumash, and we never articulate them. It says the Yud and the Hey, and a Vav, and a Hey. And what do you read? Aleph instead of a Yud, a Dalet instead of the Hey, Nun instead of the Vav, and Yud instead of the Hey. What are you doing? It doesn't say Ado Nai there. It says Yud, Hey, Vav, Hey. And the Gemara says, you know why? Because you can't articulate something you don't understand. And as long as you don't have the key of why God does things in the world, you won't understand what He's doing, who He is. And that's why He has two names. One you look at, you don't articulate, and you call Him by another name. That name that you don't articulate is the God of truth, the God of history, the God behind it all. The name you articulate, He's my governor, master, boss. Is He the source of all creation? I don't know Him. Don't understand Him. He says, so, and that's called two names. And what are the two gods I have? He says, because you're a split personality. When things go good, you say, thank God for all the good you've given me. When things go terrible, you don't say, you say, well, it's actually not good. And don't let anybody ever tell you that death is good. Bad. And pain is pain. And don't say it's for the good. It's bad. I've yet to see some, these people come up to me when I was mourning, it's for the good. And I could take a chair and smash their face in, I'd be very happy. I'm not violent. Okay? Give me a break. Did I say Toiva Meitiv on this? Oh, thank you, God. It's going to Levaya. No. Don't say that. I say, God, you're bad to me, but you know what you're doing. You know what you're doing. You know what you're doing. Believe me, it's a profound act of religion to say that. I feel bad. That means, when I say God is bad to me, it means he makes me feel bad. What is good? Something that makes me feel good. There's no objective good or objective bad. Good and bad are relative terms to things to sensitize you in a certain way. They describe sensations. A good action, something which makes people feel good about it. Bad is bad. Believe me, Adolf Hitler thought that when he took my family into where he took them, he thought he was doing something very good. I read him. Seriously, studied him. He thought he was doing a tremendous gift to humanity. He really believed we were vermin. We polluted the culture of the world and introduced the biblical morals and values which negate the natural state of humanity. And that's why he wanted to destroy us, because he wanted to destroy the morals and ethics of the Bible. Read Mein Kampf. I did. Had to. I was trying to understand. He really wanted to destroy not me, not you, but rather the philosophy of the Bible. And believe me, after the Jews, the Christian church would have come next. But we embodied the Bible. Do you believe this? This guy understood something we don't even feel. We embody the Bible. Our existence is the organic matter which teaches the Bible's morals day in and day out. Whether we say it or not, our existence teaches it. That guy understood it. I wish I would have understood that earlier too. He understood my existence is the existence of Torah, of the Bible, of the morals and ethics, which has changed the world dramatically. Oh, yeah. I read Hammurabi's codes or the different norms that were there prior to the Tanakh, and you see the revolution in Parshas Mishpatim, how things changed dramatically. It says, wow, that book changed the world enormously. Human rights, mandechar shmei, children and wives are property, literally property. Yeah. And he actually wanted to eradicate that. He believed in the morals of the forest. He did not like the idea that blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit. No. The meek will perish. It's like living in Kruger. The impala is there for a purpose. Food. That's what he believed in. And we were the obstacle to all that. Would you believe it? Did you ever think of that? We are to be destroyed, so through that he will destroy the morals and ethics of the Bible, which has polluted society. Wow. When I read that, I understood the significance of every korban. That every korban was a korban for the covenant of Kadosh Baruch Hu. Every korban was a. Why do you need korbanos, God? I don't know. And you hurt me. But I suddenly looked really, I don't just say, oh, they're kedoshim. It really meant they're mamish korbanos. They were sacrificed. Their sacrifice, their death was covered shamayim. Because you're being killed because you embodied the Bible. Not because you're from Lodz or from Grodno or from Vilna. You embody the story of the Bible. Something to think about, something to live like, something we should take this Yimach Shemai as a teacher and tell us this. I wish our teachers would tell this to our children, which we would teach it to ourselves. And that's why we were slaughtered, because of that. So you understand, it's only after the Gemara says that there will come a day when we will understand the key to history. And we look at everything which we could only say you're just, but I think you're terrible. Because I know you're actually very good. There's going to come a day which we'll understand God and we'll be able to articulate the name Yud Kei Vav Kei to the extent that we were able to look at all of history and say, this actually is not just sensible, it was a good thing, and I don't know what that means. It's good to know that it will be that way. You say that every day. B'yomahu, that day, yeah, Hashem Echad, there won't be any more a God in which we say, you're bad, but you're just. You actually only be good. That's what it says, yeah, Hashem Echad, there will be no more Daina Emes, there will only be Tova Mitiv. Retrospective of history, it's a frightening thought. Ushmo Echad, and then at that time we will be able to articulate the name, we will no more say, Aleph, Daled, Nun, Yud, we will articulate the Yud, Kei, Vav, Kei. This is a Gemara in Psachim, the end of the fourth period. Not some Hasidic book, not some esoteric Kabbalistic thing. It's good old-fashioned Litvish Bavli, Gemara. So it says. So I'm not there. And honestly, it doesn't give me much comfort. It's good to know. You know what's telling me? That actually, in God's eyes, it is good to ayat the mammoth, only I'm deficient because I don't have enough information or don't have enough the right sensitivities to understand things. It makes me feel, it doesn't make me feel good, it makes me understand. I understand it now. I understand there is a goodness there in the eyes of God, which will be revealed to man after he finishes his PhD. At the moment, I'm still in kindergarten. But there will come a time the world will graduate. We'll all get our PhD, and then we actually will see things differently. So there is comfort in that to a certain extent. There is comfort in that to a certain extent. But in the meantime, I'm quite content with saying, as far as I'm concerned at the moment, you've been bad. Bad things to me, but you know what you're doing. The most important thing, the most religious thing a person can do is embrace of God when he's not good to him, but totally trust him that he knows what he's doing. It's much easier to embrace the God which is good to you. That's nice. Can you embrace the God which is doing the right thing, although you feel at the moment he's bad to you? It's a very, very religious bracha. I found that when I had to say that bracha, because of my training and whatever I read, because of my family past, I already knew what that meant. It was a challenge. At the parent passes away. Now, can you really say it? And me, I take my time before I do things. They have to make sense to me. So I didn't just, you tear my other brother's shirts and I'll come back in a few minutes. And I had to think about it. I said, I'm going to do this, but it's got to be something real because it's not something real. God doesn't want to talk to me. So I remember saying it. It was quite a very emotional experience to be able to see. It's not easy. It's actually hard. So I'm telling you, when you say this Kinnot, this is talking about literally about the trains, about the ovens, about the crematoriums, about the gas chambers. They're all here. Oh, and I remember mentioning this week, there's a great book, if you can get a hold of it today, by Professor Yafa Elyach, Zichron Levracha, called Hasidic Tales of the Holocaust. Memoirs of Rabbi Israel Spira, the Rebbe of Bluzhov, of the Holocaust. When I'm home, I read that. I read two books on Tisha B'Av. I read Flavius to go back to the historical, what happened. And I read that book to be able to daven mincha with more kavanah. I read that book because that tells me literally episodes of what happened then and episodes of faith. How people did not, to try to understand my father that said that God was always with him. Because there are people that actually say this and discuss it and do episodes and describe how this came about for them. So I'm saying right now, if anybody can get a hold of the book, get it, your Kindle, whatever it's called. Okay? Hasidic Tales of the Holocaust, Yafa Elyach. Very much advised. So let's read this Kinnot and hopefully make the most of it. If you're better in the English, please read it in the English. honestly, because it just so, you have to have this, you have to mean this. I just won't read the English because I'm fluent in the Hebrew and it's just it sounds too religious, all the thous and the hours over there, so I have a hard time reading it, but read it in the English. Okay, I'll do the Hebrew. Zichru na v'konenu kol Yisrael kolchem yishama b'rama. Ki ha'shmida Germania es amenu b'mei zama milchama. B'misos meshunosach zarios b'rav u'batzama. Al tishkechu b'chol adorot adei tizku dirot b'nechama. Tzakasomu b'chiotehem tzufim uskurim bakroinim. Katzon latevach yuvalu l'sreifa b'kiv shoinim. Kol shav'om yizacher tamid lifnei shochein meromonim. B'karam Shema Yisrael masru nafshom la'adonei ha'adonim. Rashi yeshivot v'tamidehem va'omonei amcha shama. Hevidum b'inuyim kashim v'haragum b'yad rama. D'mei yeladim rakim tzoakim elecha min ha'adama. Nekom nikmat tap v'nashim lo techeyeh kol neshama. Al srifat alfei midrashot b'tei knesiyot v'rivot sifrei Torah v'lomdeha. Nikonein b'shiyot, shulchu v'eish mikdashei el, hitzitu v'einenu tzofiyot, yishalem ha'mavi'ir et ha'beira v'yadin b'goyim alei gviyot. Za'aku shamayim v'adama, al alfei ha'yarot mivtzarei Torah, arzot Europa v'kilotea nochalei mekaimei mesora, tzadikim zkenim v'chasidim dveikei emunah Torah, v'yom galinu me'artzenu lo haya kazeh kilayon nora. Rachem al sheruseinu, habetno mishamayim, lemachanot hakdoshim pi 10 ki yotzei Mitzrayim, komeim beis kodshenu, v'nachamenu b'kiflayim, revimenu v'avienu l'tzion v'Yerushalayim.
Tzadik v'emunos yichye. The righteous man lives in his faith in understanding that one doesn't understand. And even if one doesn't understand, there is a bigger plan. And last night after Pinchas Gutta spoke, Go asked him, did you ever feel that you would have wanted to die rather than to live? Which in and of itself, that question in and of itself is actually no words to describe the question, but it's a question. And he was silent for a moment, and then he answered and he said no, with certainty, with clarity, no. Always wanted to live. And he turned and he said that his father taught him this. He was separated from his father, his mother, and his sister, even without knowing it. On that day, his father turned to him and said, listen, when they ask you how old you are, you're going to tell them you're 5 years older. And yeah, this 90-plus-year-old man has lived his life. Living, but really living. And it's not necessarily the norm on any type of level. But he chose life. Didn't have to. And I was thinking to myself last night in relation to a perspective on whatever may happen, without understanding, without knowing why and what. It's an unbelievable story of strength. To be able to say, you know what? I've got a father who turned to me and said, live, you're going to live. And on some level, all of us being here, we've got a father who's telling us, live. Maybe live differently, but live. The last Kinnot is Elitzion on page 390. We're going to sing it together. I thank Rabbi Blachman and I thank him again for this morning in particular and helping us to utilize this time most effectively. This Kinnot and this song, if one can call it that, is in fact that message of appreciating that without understanding, we can still appreciate that there is a bigger plan and we're a part of it. And the Rav Blachman mentioned in relation to davening Moedani to say it for 5 minutes. I was thinking we spend like about 3 seconds. So to do it for 5 minutes would be quite a story. Nonetheless, it's quite an idea to perhaps take upon oneself. Maybe not even indefinitely, maybe even just tomorrow, to take it upon ourselves to try that for 5 minutes, to dedicate it to Moedani. But perhaps more broadly speaking, in relation to Tisha B'Av, and partially because of the fact that we've heard so much, to make it a little bit more tangible, or not more tangible, to continue the tangibility of it all. I've noticed in the context of the shul and in the context of interpersonal relationships, people want to be seen. It's really as simple as that. Every person just wants to be seen. And it's not simple to see another person, you know, on a peripheral level, on an external level, to see another person. Okay, how are you? Nice to see you. But on a deep level, to really see another person, not as easy as all that. I mean, just think about the really close relationships in your own life. Do you really get to see the other people in your life? Do they really get to see you? You can barely see oneself. And then we think about it within the context not of ourselves or our families or our communities, but of the entire nation of Israel, the entire world. Almost feels like something, how do you start? Where do you begin? And maybe like the Moedani, we can begin small, just within the context of our own lives, in the context, mamish, of our own lives. To be a little bit more mindful of seeing one another, affording the other to see you, and vice versa. And maybe together we're able to accomplish something very special indeed. Page 390. Daniel, you're going to help me? Michael? Tion ve'oreo kamo isha v'tireo v'kivsu lo chagurasak albano ureo alei armon asher nutak Adoreo v'yavias mechor peyel v'soich migdash Adoreo Yitzion ve'oreo Emo yishon v'tireo v'kivsu lo chagurasa continue on page 398, conclusion of chapter.
Thank you.